She laughed while counting my stolen dollars. It was supposed to be my 71st birthday, a quiet evening, the kind of simple gathering where the warmth of home softens old arguments. I'd baked the cake myself because no one else remembered how I liked it, lemon with vanilla frosting. The candles flickered across faces I loved, and for a moment, I believed peace was still possible. My granddaughter Emily smiled sweetly as she handed me a small box. Inside was my old purse, empty, limp, humiliated into a joke. Everyone laughed. Not kindly, not out of misunderstanding, but with a cruelty that echoed through years of being overlooked. The scent of wax filled the room, thick and syrupy. It mixed with the faint perfume of the lilies I'd bought for the table, and something inside me curdled. I asked lightly, "Where did you find this?" Emily shrugged. "It was just lying around." Her father, my son, smirked. "Maybe it's time you stopped hiding money in envelopes." Their laughter folded around me like smoke. The envelope they joked about wasn't a game. It was where I'd kept my savings for repairs. The porch, the broken light, the leaky tap that never got fixed. Every dollar had been earned quietly over months, stashed away because I didn't want to ask anyone for help. Now my hiding place had become their entertainment. I felt my cheeks burn, though I kept my smile steady. "Well," I said, "I suppose I'll have to find a new spot." Peter raised his glass. "To Mom, the secret banker." Their laughter came again, short, sharp, like cut glass. Inside, something cracked. The room smelled of sugar and betrayal. I excused myself to the kitchen, pretending to fetch more plates. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that didn't mock me. I could still hear them in the next room, voices blending, a joke stretching into something uglier. My fingers trembled as I touched the counter. The wax from the candle had dripped, hardening into small yellow pools. I stared at them, each one sealing a memory I no longer trusted. Emily came in behind me carrying her phone. "Grandma, don't be mad. It was just a joke." "A joke?" I whispered. "About what belongs to me." She hesitated, eyes darting. "Dad said you wouldn't notice if it was gone. He said it was for something important." Her words hung there, innocent, thoughtless, damning. "Something important," I repeated. My voice barely reached above the hum. She looked down, twisting her bracelet. "It's fine now. He said he'd put it back." The air grew heavier, scented with candle smoke and lemon icing. I wanted to speak, to scold, to demand, but all I managed was silence, the kind that carries weight, not peace. I walked back to the table, sat down, and watched the flames dance on the last of the candles. Each one burned shorter, weaker, as if time itself were running out. Around me, the conversation shifted to gifts, jokes, dessert. No one noticed how still I'd become. I folded the empty envelope into my palm under the table. The paper was warm, almost alive from the heat of my skin. I thought of the hours I'd spent saving each bill, small steps toward independence, now trampled by laughter. They would not see my anger tonight. I smiled when they sang again, but I counted each face in silence, memorizing the tone of every voice. Something had been taken, not just money, but a promise that family still meant safety. In that quiet vow forming between breaths, I decided something. I would not be their amusement. I would find the truth, not through shouting, not through begging, but by patience. Evidence, not emotion. The scent of wax thickened again. A small trail of smoke rose from a candle that had burned too long, its wick curling into itself. I pressed my hand over my chest, feeling the slow, deliberate beat beneath my ribs. That was proof enough that I still existed, still owned what they thought they could steal. Later, when they left and the house fell quiet, I walked through every room, touching the places that had been mine, the drawer by the window, the worn armrest, the side table where the purse had rested. Shadows stretched long across the carpet, bending like witnesses. I picked up one melted candle, its edge solidified into a ridge of amber wax, and set it near the window. The faint scent of smoke still lingered. Outside, the night was calm, the kind that tempts forgiveness. But I knew better. Forgiveness without truth is just surrender. I whispered to the dark, "I'll find out who led her into it." Then I turned off the lights one by one, leaving the last candle burning alone. I smiled, but the wax was already hardening. The drawer gaped like a mouth mid-lie. Morning light slanted through the curtains, pale and uncertain, as if afraid to expose what the night had done. I'd been cleaning after the birthday dinner, collecting crumbs and folded napkins, when I noticed it, my bureau drawer, left open just enough to show its betrayal. Inside, the order I'd kept for years had been disturbed, receipts scattered like feathers, the small brass key missing from its usual spot, and the bank statement, the one I'd tucked carefully under the cloth, gone. The house was too quiet for comfort. Even the tick of the clock felt slower, hesitant. I ran my hand across the polished surface, the faint sound of my palm brushing wood filling the silence. That soft rhythm, usually reassuring, now echoed like an accusation. Peter came down the hallway, still in his robe, holding his mug of coffee. "You're up early," he said casually. "Something wrong?" I turned, forcing calm into my voice. "The drawer, it's been opened." He shrugged, not even looking. "Maybe Emily. You know how kids are, always curious." "She's not a child anymore," I said quietly. He smiled without warmth. "You're overthinking again. No one wants your old papers." But I did not believe him. The sound of the mirror on the opposite wall creaked faintly as the air shifted. The faint click seemed to mock me, repeating the lie he had just told. When he left for work, the silence deepened. I sat at the table, listening to the house breathe. Every small sound, door hinges, the hum of the refrigerator, felt amplified, deliberate. I thought of the missing statement, the same one that had shown my withdrawal of $4,200 last month. I'd been saving for repairs, the porch boards rotting underfoot. That money was meant for my safety, for the roof above my head. Now it was gone, along with the trust that used to fill these walls. I began making notes in a small notepad from the kitchen drawer. Not for vengeance, but memory. A record of what no one else would acknowledge. Drawer left open, 7:45 a.m. Key missing, small brass. Peter dismissive. The sound of my pen scratching against the page was steady, grounding. Every click of it closing became a small declaration. I will not forget. Around noon, Emily came over, her voice breezy as ever. "Grandma, Dad said you were upset." I studied her reflection in the hallway mirror before turning. "Did you touch my drawer?" Her eyes darted, just for a moment. "No, why would I?" "You tell me." She laughed, too quickly. "You're getting paranoid. Maybe it was the cat." I didn't have a cat. For a second, she realized what she'd said, her face freezing, then softening into guilt. "I'll ask Dad about it, okay?" she murmured, walking away before I could respond. When the door closed behind her, the sound of it hit like a verdict. I sat there, staring at the mirror. My reflection looked older, not by years, but by disappointment. Behind me, the faint hum of the refrigerator blended with the echo of my own breath. There was a pulse in the quiet, steady, defiant. I had learned something important. Silence can be a trap, but it can also be armor. By evening, I'd taken another notebook, started a list of who had keys, who entered when, who touched what. Patterns matter. People reveal themselves through repetition. "Grandma, why do you write everything down?" Emily had once asked years ago. "Because," I'd said, "truth fades when it's only memory." Now I understood that lesson better than ever. I locked the rest of the drawers that night, turning each key with care. The clicks echoed softly through the hallway, rhythmic, like the steady beat of resolve. In the mirror, the reflection of my movements shimmered faintly. Two selves, one doubting, one determined. The stakes had shifted. This was no longer about misplaced papers or careless jokes. It was about trust, and how easily it could be rewritten. I knew what I stood to lose, not just savings, but dignity. That was worth far more than any balance sheet could measure. As I placed the notebook inside a kitchen cabinet, hidden behind a row of jars, the refrigerator hummed again, softer this time, almost approving. Outside, the wind pressed against the window, a whisper of warning. Someone had learned my habits. Someone had memorized my hiding places. Every number hides a face. The screen glowed pale blue in the half-dark room, each figure staring back at me like a quiet accusation. My balance had fallen by exactly $4,200 overnight. The numbers didn't lie. They never do. But I couldn't remember authorizing a single transfer. My hand trembled slightly as I clicked through the online ledger, each line identical except for the destination account, hidden behind familiar initials. The lamplight beside me flickered, throwing shadows across the receipts I'd spread over the table. The soft hum of electricity filled the silence. I could smell faint metal from the wires, mixed with the dryness of paper. The light felt both kind and cruel. It revealed everything, but offered no warmth. I printed the statements. Each page emerged with a mechanical sigh, curling faintly at the edges. The timestamps were precise, almost deliberate. Whoever did this had patience, planning. The security hint on one transfer stopped me cold. Emily's birthday. I sat back in my chair, hearing only the clock ticking on the wall. Every sound became a countdown. Every second, a reminder that my family might be involved. I wanted to dismiss the thought, to cling to the illusion that this was some clerical mistake. But deep down, I knew better. Betrayal doesn't always roar. It sometimes signs in neat digital letters. At noon, I took my folder of receipts and went to the bank. The fluorescent lights hummed above, sharp and unforgiving. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and ink. I waited in line, watching strangers move with the ease of people who still believed in systems. When it was my turn, the clerk greeted me politely. "How can I help you today?" "My balance dropped," I said quietly. $4,200. Overnight. He frowned, typed something, then turned the screen slightly toward me. "These are the transactions." "I didn't make them." He hesitated, glancing around. "They're all verified through your online portal." "I don't use that portal," I replied, my voice tightening. He leaned closer, lowering his tone. "Then someone else does." I could feel my heartbeat against my ribs. The light above us buzzed faintly, as if straining to stay alive. "Can you tell me where the money went?" "I can't give you names," he said, "but the linked email starts with EM." My throat dried. "Emily." The name escaped before I could stop it. He studied me carefully. "Would you like to file an internal dispute? We'll need your signature on record." I nodded. He slid a form toward me labeled in small print. Customer Transaction Dispute. Reference ID 104B7. My pen moved slower than my thoughts. Each loop of ink felt heavier than the last. "How long will it take?" I asked. 10 business days usually. I'll mark it urgent." His kindness was soft, almost apologetic. In his eyes, I saw what pity looks like when someone can't fix your pain. When I left the bank, the sunlight outside felt too bright. I could still see the faint afterimage of numbers burned into my mind. I sat in my car for a long minute, the steering wheel cold under my hands. The ticking from the dashboard clock joined the echo from the bank's hallway, the same rhythmic truth repeating, "Time doesn't stop for betrayal." I drove home in silence. Inside, the house looked the same, but everything felt rearranged. The clock in the hallway clicked louder than before, every sound bouncing off the walls like a metronome for suspicion. I placed the printed pages in a binder, labeling each one carefully. "Proof," I whispered to myself. "Proof that it wasn't me." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the image of the clerk's eyes, how they softened when he realized I already knew the answer. In the distance, the clock struck 11, its echo bleeding into the quiet. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the light from the street lamp spill through the curtains, faint but unrelenting. Every line in that ledger was a shadow of someone's decision. and as I drifted between exhaustion and anger, I heard again what the clerk had said before I left, his voice low enough that only guilt could have carried it through memory. "It's someone you trust." Her voice on my voicemail was too calm. It was early morning, the kind of gray light that makes everything feel paused between night and consequence. The phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, an old device with a crack across the corner. I pressed play without expecting anything unusual. "Hey, thanks again," Emily's voice said, casual, sweet. "Couldn't have done it without you. She'll never notice." There was laughter in the background. A man's. I knew that laugh. Peter. The air shifted, cold, pushing through the open window beside me. I stood there, still holding the phone as if it were something fragile and contaminated. The recording continued, her tone bright, ordinary, untouched by guilt. "She won't notice." Those words landed harder than any insult ever could. I replayed the message once, then again. The house grew quieter each time, as if listening. The hum of the refrigerator dulled. The curtains barely moved, but I could feel the draft sneaking through. My fingers felt numb from the chill. When the message ended, the silence was unbearable. I opened the window wider, letting the cold pour in until my breath came out in faint clouds. I wanted to feel something sharper than betrayal, something that would wake me from disbelief. Peter's voice, Emily's gratitude, my savings, my trust. I whispered to the empty room. They practiced this. For a moment, I stared at the phone screen, at the tiny speaker that had carried their conspiracy into my kitchen. Proof. Simple, accidental, devastating proof. By the third replay, my anger began to take shape. It wasn't loud, it was measured. I went to my desk and wrote the exact timestamp from the voicemail, 7:12 a.m., next to the note from the bank. Then I printed the message transcript from my email sync, marking it reference ID 24B8. The paper trembled slightly as it came out of the printer, thin as skin, real as the voice still echoing in my ears. I needed help, not comfort, but precision. That afternoon, I called Mary. She had retired from bookkeeping years ago, but still carried the calm authority of someone who lived by evidence, not sentiment. "Mary," I said when she answered, "I think I found something I shouldn't have." "What is it?" "A voicemail, Emily thanking someone for moving money out of my account." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And who's the someone?" I hesitated. "Peter?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Bring me what you have." The drive to her house was short, but it felt longer. The temperature outside had fallen to 48 degrees. The car heater wheezed, trying to keep up. Every red light seemed like a test of patience. I arrived with my binder, the printed statements, and that single piece of paper with the voicemail reference. She met me at the door, her gray hair pulled back, glasses perched on the edge of her nose. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said softly. "I've heard one." She took the paper, read the reference line twice, and nodded. "We'll trace it. Money leaves fingerprints even when people don't." I watched her lay the pages out beneath a desk lamp. The light was warm, but the air still felt cold. She underlined times, dates, matching each one with earlier withdrawals. "Your son and granddaughter," she said finally. "They coordinated this. The timestamps overlap within 2 minutes." My throat closed. So it wasn't a mistake. No, it was a plan. The word plan cut through me. Plans are what families make for birthdays, for holidays, not theft. Mary folded the transcript carefully, placing it back in the binder. "Keep this safe. You'll need it later." "For what?" "For when they start denying." Outside her window, the wind rattled the bare branches, a sound thin and metallic. I rubbed my hands together, trying to warm them, but the cold was internal now. Betrayal has its own temperature, steady, bone deep. Driving home, I didn't turn on the radio. I wanted to hear only my thoughts, the faint hum of the car, and the echo of those words from the recording. She won't notice, but I did. I noticed everything now. Their voices had learned to speak without guilt. They stopped tending the garden when truth grew there. The soil had turned dry from neglect, and the roses bent under their own weight. I knelt among them that morning, gloved hands pressing into earth that used to bloom freely. It was strange how beauty withers when lies begin to take root. The house behind me was silent, but I knew it wouldn't last. I had changed the locks, reset the alarm codes, sealed what little control I still had over this place. The air smelled faintly of rust and damp soil, the scent grounding me as I worked. The rough texture of the ground pressed into my palms, almost reminding me I was still here, still able to act. By noon, the quiet broke. Peter's car screeched into the driveway. He slammed the door and marched toward me, his face red, his voice sharp. "What did you do?" "I protected my home." "You changed the locks?" "Yes." He laughed, short, bitter. "You're losing it, Mom. You're locking out your own family." "I'm locking out those who took advantage." "Don't start that again." His tone cracked something in me, the last layer of patience. I straightened, wiping dirt from my hands, the garden clinging to my gloves like a witness. "This isn't about family anymore," I said. "It's about boundaries." He stepped closer. "You can't just—" "I already did." For a second, the wind cut between us, rustling the fence and the brittle leaves. The old wooden posts leaned slightly, worn from years of weather, yet still standing. I saw myself in that fence, battered but still upright. He pointed toward the door. "You're making a fool of yourself." "Then let the neighborhood watch." I reached into the dirt, my hand brushing against something hard and forgotten, a small camera I'd buried months ago to record the birds. I brushed it off, soil scratching at the lens, and turned it on. A soft click. It still worked. Peter's voice rose, his words laced with contempt. "You think this makes you powerful? You think anyone will take you seriously?" The camera caught every word, steady and silent. "I don't need power," I said. "Just proof." He froze, realizing. "You're recording me?" "Not anymore," I said, and turned the device toward the fence instead, capturing the slanting boards behind him. "Now I'm documenting the truth." He scoffed, stepping back. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but at least it'll be on record." When he left, the air felt lighter but colder. I knelt again, this time not to tend the garden but to steady myself. The soil crumbled between my fingers, dry yet familiar. I dug a shallow groove near the fence and placed a single rose cutting there. Its stem was weak, but it still had color. "Grow," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I meant the flower or myself. That afternoon, I called the neighborhood security office. The woman on the line spoke with practiced empathy. "Do you wish to file a restricted access notice?" "Yes. Record that entry under reference ID 32A4. She confirmed it, her tone careful. "That makes it official, ma'am. If anyone breaches that line, it will trigger an alert." I thanked her and hung up. My hands were still dirty, and when I brushed them together, the soil stuck to my palms like evidence, physical, undeniable. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the fence slats. The roses glowed faintly in the dimming light, a fragile reminder that life could persist even when trust couldn't. I took one final photograph of the flower bed, the roughness of the wood behind it clear and sharp. The fence stood like an old guardian between what was mine and what had been taken. For the first time, I felt safe enough to breathe. He'd said I'd regret closing that gate. Maybe he was right. But regret, unlike fear, is something I can live with. He warned, "You'll regret closing that gate." My name appeared where my hand never moved. The paper lay on the desk, smooth, official, and cruelly confident. The lawyer's office smelled of ink and furniture polish, the scent of authority, of people who believed in procedure more than people. I stood there, staring at the signature that wasn't mine, the curve of each letter copied with unsettling precision. The air was heavy with quiet formality. A clock ticked somewhere behind me, each second pressing deeper into disbelief. Across the desk, Ms. Gray adjusted her glasses, her calm expression masking the gravity of what we were seeing. "This is your signature?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "No, it's his." "You're certain?" "I've been writing that name for more than 50 years. I know my own hand." She lifted the paper closer to the light. The seal at the bottom shimmered faintly, its golden edges catching the glow. It read, "Joint Ownership Authorization, Reference ID 48C2. My son's name appeared just below mine, as if joined by consent. The scent of the ink was sharp, familiar. It carried a faint sweetness, like old promises made in good faith, promises that now felt rotten. I could almost taste the bitterness of trust curdling on my tongue. Ms. Gray laid the document flat again. "This was notarized last month. Either someone forged your approval, or someone inside the notary's office looked the other way. Can we prove which? We'll start by verifying the record. I'll file a formal inquiry today." Her tone was steady, practical. Mine wasn't. "He took my name," I said quietly. "Not my money, not my house, my name." She nodded. "Names are where power begins." I pressed my fingers against the table, feeling the grain of polished wood beneath my palm. It steadied me for a moment. Then I noticed another detail, the faint smudge near the lower edge of the form. Ink, still slightly raised, as though the forger had signed in haste. I traced it lightly and felt the tacky residue. Proof lived in small textures like this. Ms. Gray placed the document in a protective sleeve and sealed it. "I'll make a certified copy and send it to the registrar for verification. There'll be a tracking number assigned, but we'll call it what it is, a theft by signature." Her phrasing was clinical, but I appreciated it. Truth needed clean language, not pity. I stood by the window while she prepared the paperwork. Outside, the street shimmered under late afternoon light. Cars passed, indifferent. It struck me that betrayal could look so ordinary from a distance. Just a person walking into a building, signing a name, walking out richer and unburdened. She handed me an envelope with a printout attached. "Here's your copy. Keep it safe." Will it hold up? It will if the notary admits oversight, and if not, we'll push higher. The system loves paper. Let's feed it proof. Her confidence gave me strength I didn't feel. I inhaled the faint chemical scent of ink again before folding the envelope into my bag. "What happens to people who forge documents like this?" "Depends on the motive," she said. "But intent leaves fingerprints." On the way out, the receptionist gave me a polite smile. "Have a good afternoon." I wanted to laugh. Afternoon. The day had ended the moment I saw that seal. The elevator hummed softly as it descended. My reflection in the chrome doors looked older than I remembered, but more deliberate too. This wasn't shock anymore. It was evidence turning into action. Outside, the sun was low, amber light bouncing off car hoods. I pulled out the copy of the document again. The paper's texture was smooth, too smooth, as if honesty had been pressed out of it. My name gleamed faintly in the fading light, a counterfeit reflection of who I used to be. I thought about what Ms. Gray had said. Names are where power begins. If that was true, then reclaiming mine was no longer pride. It was survival. I placed the document back in the envelope and sealed it with the same care one might seal a wound. The adhesive stuck under my fingertips, tacky and certain. I knew what had to follow. More forms, more offices, more proofs. Justice, I realized, doesn't arrive as forgiveness. It arrives stamped, filed, and notarized. When I looked down again, the seal caught the last ray of sunlight. For a brief second, it shone crimson, like something bruised and permanent. The seal gleamed like a bruise under glass. They stopped speaking when I entered. The lobby was quiet in that deliberate, staged way, like silence rehearsed to make a point. Every head turned just long enough to pretend it hadn't. I walked to the counter, folder in hand, the air around me thick with polite hostility. The glass doors behind me shut with a soft sigh, sealing me in with their whispers. Peter had gotten here before me, clearly. He'd told them I was losing memory, that my complaints were confusion, that my transactions were mistakes of age. The lie had traveled faster than truth ever could. I could feel it, the way people looked at me, gentle, indulgent, as if I were a story told at my own expense. I set the folder on the counter. "I need to file a complaint," I said evenly. My voice echoed slightly against the marble floor. The clerk, young, careful, nodded, pulling out a printed form. Nature of complaint? Forgery, internal negligence, and defamation. He hesitated. "Would you like to speak with a supervisor?" "No, I'd like it recorded." He blinked, realizing I wasn't asking for help. I was creating evidence. The sound of the pen scratching across paper was steady, deliberate. My handwriting looked firmer than I felt. I listed dates, amounts, and names. Then, under additional remarks, I wrote a single sentence. Trust is not a mental illness. When I slid the papers back, he scanned them quickly. "You'll get an acknowledgement receipt shortly," he said. "Reference number 61F9. His tone had softened, not pity, but respect. Maybe truth has its own gravity, even in a place built for numbers. Behind us, someone coughed. Another whispered. The sound traveled like rumor itself. Quiet, cutting, constant. I ignored it. He handed me the stamped acknowledgement. The ink was still wet. "We'll review this internally. It may take 10 business days." "I'll wait," I said. Then I closed the folder. The click of its metal fastener snapped through the air like a verdict. Every whisper stopped for a moment. That sound, that single metallic snap, felt cleaner than justice, sharper than anger. It reminded me of glass meeting stone, the instant something fragile stops pretending to hold together. As I turned, I caught the reflection of 2 employees leaning near the doorway, their conversation abruptly ending. One of them, the same clerk who'd processed my account before, looked away too late. His guilt was small, but visible. I walked over, calm, but certain. "Did you handle my joint authorization form last month?" He stammered, "Ma'am, I only stamped what was approved." "Approved by whom?" He looked at the floor. "By your son." There it was, the soft confession tucked between fear and habit. I didn't need to raise my voice. Silence works better when it's earned. I thanked him quietly and left. But as I pushed open the door, I heard footsteps behind me. The young clerk from the counter caught up, voice low. "Ma'am." He hesitated, then slipped something into my hand. A photocopy, my form, his initials at the bottom. "Keep this," he said, "in case it disappears from the system." I stared at him, unsure if I should thank or warn him. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I saw your file," he said. "You're not confused. You're careful. They just don't like careful people." He turned back before anyone noticed. I folded the copy and placed it inside my coat. The edges were still warm from the printer. Outside, the sunlight hit the bank's glass front. I saw my reflection, small, tired, but unbroken. Inside, the whispers had resumed. I could almost hear them through the door, muted but thick with judgment. Rumors, I thought, can build walls. But paperwork builds exits. I walked down the steps, clutching the folder tight. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim of silence. I felt like its owner. The folder pressed against my side, its weight grounding me. Each step echoed back from the glass entrance, a rhythm of defiance. Their silence weighed more than any accusation. 4 withdrawals, 1 signature, mine. The numbers glared up from the audit sheet like quiet confessions. $2,200, $800, $2,000, $3,000. The sum, $7,000, felt heavier than the money itself. Each figure stood there, small but merciless, proof that deceit had learned how to spell my name. Mary sat across from me at the dining table, sleeves rolled, glasses low on her nose. The lamp between us cast a tired yellow light, its shade trembling slightly from the hum of the old ceiling fan. She ran her finger along each row, whispering under her breath as if reading the story hidden inside the arithmetic. "They tried to keep it even," she murmured. spacing withdrawals out, enough time between each to look routine. How long? 2 months apart, always signed here. She tapped the column with her pen, and there it was. My name, repeated 4 times, but hollow, fragile, foreign. The light caught the strokes of the forged letters. My real signature curved with muscle memory. This one hesitated, trying to sound like me but lacking rhythm. "They didn't just take my money," I said softly. "They took my hand and made it lie." Mary looked up, her voice firm. "This ledger is your mirror now. No one argues with numbers." I leaned closer, studying the paper. The glow of the lamp deepened the contrast, the ink darker, the evidence undeniable. A faint warmth rose from the bulb, making the air around us hum with low tension. That light was my anchor, the sense that proof could still push back against betrayal. She began drafting the notice to the bank. "We'll attach the audit ledger and request a transaction review. Once it's logged, they're legally obligated to respond. And if they don't, then we escalate. There's a financial ombudsman for cases like this." I watched her write. Each word felt like a brick laid in the foundation of something solid again. For weeks I had floated through confusion, suspicion, silence. But this was the sound of rebuilding. The calculator clicked beside her hand. Each press echoed like a heartbeat. $7,000 total, she said, confirming aloud. 4 entries, same account, same forged hand. The numbers had become a kind of testimony, their truth mechanical and unfeeling. I preferred it that way. Emotion had failed me. Numbers did not. When the document was ready, she slid it across the table. "Sign here," she said. I hesitated. "Feels strange signing anything again." Mary smiled gently. "Then let this one be the first that matters." I took the pen. My hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from clarity. The tip of the pen met paper, and for a moment the world steadied. Ink spread, smooth and deliberate. Mine again, finally. As she stamped the file, a faint smell of warmed metal rose from the lamp. "You've got your proof," she said. "You're not fighting shadows anymore." "Proof," I repeated. "That's all justice really is, isn't it? Evidence that survives disbelief." Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The storm that had hung for days seemed ready to break. The lamp flickered once, casting Mary's shadow long across the table. She reached over to steady the bulb. "Don't let it go out," I whispered. "It won't," she replied. We sat in silence for a while, just the quiet hum of the lamp and the rustle of paper. The ledger's columns gleamed faintly where the ink was fresh. I traced one line with my finger, the date of the first withdrawal, and realized how far betrayal had stretched its hand. Then I folded the notice, sealing it with deliberate care. Each crease felt like a promise kept to myself. Tomorrow, we would deliver it to the bank. The act would be simple, paper sliding across a counter. But in that small motion lived months of humiliation, turned into defiance. The light over us dimmed for a second, then steadied again. Mary smiled without looking up. "See? Even the lamp knows when to hold on." I looked at the glowing bulb, tired, trembling, but still burning, and thought, maybe that's all survival really is. The lamp flickered, but did not fail. Every smiling photo became a witness. The living room was drenched in afternoon light, gold on glass, soft but accusing. Frames covered the wall, birthdays, graduations, holidays, all those moments I once thought immortal. But as I stood there, I realized they weren't memories anymore. They were evidence. Every smile had aged into something harder, something that knew. Peter stood by the fireplace, his jaw tight. Emily sat on the couch, eyes wet, twisting her sleeve like a child caught in a lie she didn't write but carried anyway. Between us, the air had weight, thick with old warmth curdled into resentment. "I found the report," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "The bank confirmed your access ended 2 months ago, yet the estate file shows new entries, your logins." Peter's head snapped up. "I was just checking on things. You're making it sound criminal." "It is," I said. He laughed, short and sharp. "You're overreacting. You always do." "I'm documenting," I corrected. The words hung there, cold and official. Documentation. What a sterile way to replace love. But truth needed its own armor now, and that armor was paper, not forgiveness. Emily whispered, "Grandma, please. We just wanted to help. You've been—" "Careful," I interrupted. "Don't finish that sentence." She looked down. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant." The clock ticked on the mantel. 1 second, then another. The sound filled the pause that used to belong to laughter. I ran my fingers along a picture frame, Peter at 17 holding a trophy. The dust clung to my skin, fine and dry like the residue of affection long unused. "Dust," I murmured. "It settles when no one bothers to clean." He scoffed. "Are you lecturing me now?" "I'm reminding you," I said quietly, "of what happens when neglect becomes habit." The security report lay open on the coffee table. Black ink on white paper, each line a betrayal written in the calm tone of bureaucracy. Unauthorized access detected, consent withdrawn. The phrase repeated like a quiet mantra of liberation. I took a breath. "Effective immediately, you're no longer permitted to handle any financial or legal affairs related to my estate. I've filed the consent withdrawal. It's recorded under entry ID 79B3. Peter's face darkened. "You filed that?" "Yes." "With the notary?" "Yes." "You've lost it," he hissed. Emily started crying, soft and genuine. "You're tearing this family apart." "No," I said. "You did that when you traded honesty for convenience." He stepped forward. "We were trying to protect you." "By forging? By lying? By surviving?" His shout cracked the air. "Do you know how hard it's been since Dad—" "Enough!" The word startled even me. Silence followed, deep and final. I turned toward the wall again. The photos stared back, a gallery of ghosts, too polite to speak. "This house," I said, "has seen me forgive more times than I can count. But forgiveness isn't free. It costs truth, and I'm done paying." The dust on the frame smeared under my touch, streaking across Peter's smiling face. Beneath the glass, the image of family blurred, proof that time erases even the prettiest lies. Emily's sobs filled the room. Peter crossed his arms. "So what now? You going to sue us?" "I don't have to," I said. "The record already did." He stared at me, jaw twitching. "You really think paper means more than blood?" "Paper remembers," I replied. "Blood forgets." For a moment, no one moved. The lamp flickered, and the light bent across the glass frames, glancing off old faces that no longer looked kind. He muttered, voice low and venomous, "You've ruined our family for paper." The words struck like ash, bitter, weightless, final. But I didn't flinch. The report, the wall, the silence, everything around me had already testified. I learned to write my pain in forms. Each line was both confession and defense, written not in poetry, but procedure. The bureau's corridors smelled of disinfectant and determination, a sterile kind of honesty. My shoes echoed on the tiled floor as I clutched the file, thick with copies, receipts, and every trace of my humiliation turned into evidence. Behind the counter sat a man in uniform gray, his expression neither cruel nor kind. "Reason for your submission?" he asked, without looking up. "Financial fraud," I said. "Internal and familial." He finally raised his eyes. "Family?" "Yes, but today they're just names on a report." He nodded, motioning me to sit. The air conditioning hummed faintly, too cold for comfort. I set the file down. The scent of disinfectant mixed with the faint musk of paper and ink. Sharp, clean, purposeful. Hope, I realized, could smell like that. He opened the file, gloved hands careful. "You've documented everything?" Every withdrawal, every forged signature, even the acknowledgement letter from the bank. He flipped through the pages slowly. The soft rustle of paper felt like progress. I watched him read, and for the first time in months, I wasn't begging anyone to believe me. The evidence spoke in a voice louder than accusation. He paused. "Your ally, Ms. Gray, she verified these?" "Yes. Independent review, notarized, reference entry A12. He made a note in the margin. "Good. That saves us a step." A small clock on the wall clicked to 11:40. Time didn't drag here. It counted. "We'll need to cross-check with the bank and the notary's registry," he said. "If the signatures conflict, it qualifies as institutional breach." "And if they don't?" I asked. "Then we ask why they look the same when they shouldn't." I almost smiled. "That's what I asked months ago." "Now you'll get an answer," he replied. He handed me a pen to sign the declaration. It was heavier than expected, a dark metal barrel that left a faint indentation against my fingers. I signed deliberately, the loops steady, the letters exact. My real hand, my real name, on record again, finally. The officer stamped the top page. "Your submission receipt," he said, sliding it across. The ink bled slightly on the edges, the scent fresh and strong. "We'll issue an acknowledgement by end of day, review period 10 business days. 10. The number felt biblical, structured hope, measured faith. I folded the paper carefully, its texture crisp, the kind that resists tears. Outside, the sunlight had shifted pale against the steps. The wind picked up, scattering dry leaves across the pavement. They moved like spent confetti after a celebration that no one stayed to clean. I stood there for a moment, file in hand, watching them whirl. I thought of all the times I'd written letters that never reached their destination. Apologies, explanations, desperate pleas for understanding. But this one was different. This one had a barcode, a date, a signature that would not vanish in a drawer. A woman exited the building beside me, holding her own folder. She glanced over, her expression weary but proud. "Fraud case?" she asked quietly. "Yes." "Mine took 3 months," she said. "Don't give up before they call." "I won't," she smiled faintly. "Then you'll win." Her footsteps faded down the stairs, leaving me in the stillness of institutional faith, the belief that bureaucracy, for all its coldness, might yet deliver warmth in the form of truth. I looked down at the file again. The edges were slightly bent from my grip, the pen mark still glistening faintly on the final page. The scent lingered, ink and disinfectant, and the ghost of resolve. I realized something. Pain, once recorded, loses its power to unmake you. It becomes a statement, steady, permanent, filed. The door behind me opened. The officer stepped out briefly. "Ma'am?" "Yes?" He held up a stamped copy. "For your record, we'll make this official." They called my name, and silence answered. The hall was colder than I expected. Fluorescent light slicing across rows of faces, each one pretending not to know me. The marble floor gleamed, too clean, like it had swallowed 1,000 quiet scandals before mine. I walked to the podium. The sound of my heels against the stone was the only rhythm I could trust. The clerk adjusted his glasses. "State your purpose." I unfolded the notice stamped in blue ink. "Order of hearing, County Clerk. Reference B1029, I said. My voice didn't tremble. It didn't need to. It was the sound of a woman who had already lost everything but truth. Behind me the clock ticked steadily. Its second hand swept like judgment itself, slicing through excuses and memory alike. Each movement reminded me why I was here, not to win back affection, but to reclaim record. Peter sat at the defense table. His tie was perfect, his smirk practiced. Emily beside him wouldn't meet my gaze. Her hands twisted a tissue until it looked like lace. The judge nodded. "You may begin." I took a breath. 4 withdrawals, 1 forged signature, mine, each verified by audit. Total amount, $7,000. submitted under false pretext of estate management. The documents were filed with fraudulent intent. Peter's lawyer interrupted. Objection, assumption of intent. The judge raised a hand. Overruled. Let her continue. The paper rustled in my fingers, my last trembling bridge between silence and proof. The ledger entries correspond with dates of unauthorized access, I said, pointing to the printed columns. These signatures, I held them up, are not mine. A low murmur rippled through the hall. Neighbors, those same ones who'd once smiled at us in grocery aisles, now leaned closer, their curiosity dressed as sympathy. Peter's voice rose. She's twisting it. She planned this. Planned? I turned toward him, my tone calm but sharp. I planned to trust you. I planned to grow old believing loyalty still meant something. He clenched his fists, eyes flashing. You don't know what you're talking about. I know what I signed, and what I didn't. The gavel struck once, hard, echoing through marble. That sound anchored the room, scattering whispers like startled birds. I continued reading, each word a cut through the fabric of denial. Attached within this testimony is the bank's acknowledgement receipt, Institutional Record 79B3. It confirms the forgery under witness verification. The judge leaned forward. All evidence copies filed? Yes, Your Honor. Included with transcript entry A12 notarized. The court reporter's fingers clacked softly, capturing every syllable I released into the world. The sound was relentless, mechanical, pure. It reminded me of how truth, once spoken, keeps moving, whether the guilty listen or not. Emily suddenly stood, her chair scraping. "Stop this, please," she cried. "You're destroying him." "He destroyed himself," I said gently. "I'm just reading what he wrote in my name." For a moment, the hall froze. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. Then came a whisper from somewhere in the back, someone muttering, "It's all in the documents." And that small sound spread like wildfire. The judge tapped the bench again. "Order. Proceed with closing statement." I looked at the transcript before me, a printed copy already stamped and bound. My hand traced the edge, feeling the ridged paper under my fingertips, the texture of finality. "I submit this," I said, placing it on the stand. "Truth doesn't need memory to survive. It only needs a record." The clerk collected the papers. The audience exhaled, a single tired breath that filled the hall. Peter leaned toward his lawyer, muttering, but his voice carried enough for me to hear. "She planned this all along." I didn't respond. The gavel came down again, and its echo folded the moment into history. Truth came printed on cheap paper. The morning light crawled over my porch, catching the edges of the newspaper that someone had tossed too close to the steps. The ink bled slightly where dew had touched it, but the headline was still clear enough to wound. Granddaughter implicated in family theft case. The letters screamed louder than any argument we'd ever had. Beneath them, smaller text told a story assembled from court transcripts, records, and speculation. My life reduced to bullet points and quotation marks. I bent down, fingers brushing the wet newsprint. It left a faint gray smear on my skin, the residue of exposure. I read the lines slowly, each one a reminder that truth, once printed, doesn't ask permission to enter your home. A car passed, tires whispering against the curb. The streetlight, though it was day, hadn't shut off yet. Its pale glow stretched across the porch like a silent witness that refused to rest. That same light had guided me home the night before, when I'd walked out of the courthouse, a dozen eyes following my every step. Now, justice had gone public. The phone inside rang once, twice, then again. I let it echo unanswered. Reporters. They always wanted a quote, not a story. They wanted sound bites that could bleed into evening broadcasts, but not the silence that came after. I sat on the porch, paper still in my lap. A breeze lifted one of the inner pages, and for a moment it fluttered against my knee like something alive, desperate to flee. Across the column, a smaller piece was printed, an editorial, unsigned. She faced her own blood for the sake of accountability. It takes courage to fight in daylight what others hide in family rooms. The light shifted, cutting sharper through the porch railing. Dust danced in the beam, golden and restless. I'd never noticed how much had gathered in the corners, on the boards, even over the window frames. After months of fighting shadows, I finally saw the residue, the quiet leftovers of chaos. I whispered to no one, "This is what remains after truth arrives." Down the street, two neighbors whispered over their fences, their voices too low to catch but loud enough to sting. The kind of curiosity that pretends to pity. The phone rang again. This time, I rose, walking past the living room mirror. My reflection looked unfamiliar. Calmer, maybe older. The paper crinkled in my hand. I thought of Emily. How it must feel to see her name printed like that. I hoped she'd learn, as I did, that public shame can also be public cleansing. My ally, Ms. Gray, had warned me this might happen. "Once evidence enters daylight," she'd said, "you can't pull it back into shadow. Be ready for both justice and judgment." She was right. I wasn't angry at the paper. It had done what people wouldn't. It documented. It stripped away the whispered denials and made deceit visible. A small envelope sat near the door, yesterday's delivery I hadn't opened. Inside, a printed acknowledgement from the Fraud Bureau. Case elevated to review panel. Formal decision pending within 14 days. 14. Enough time for truth to circulate, for gossip to cool, for conscience to catch up. Outside, a child on a bicycle slowed, near the gate, staring at me. He must have recognized my face from the photo, one they'd pulled from some forgotten public file. I didn't wave. I just watched as he rode away, leaving the paper fluttering in the wind like a flag of reluctant victory. The light dimmed slightly, clouds gathering above. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. Silence had become its own declaration, one spoken for everyone who'd ever feared the cost of paperwork more than the weight of pain. The phone rang again, louder this time. I stared at it, its blinking light pulsing like a question I no longer needed to answer. It rang once more, then stopped. I let it die. Her handwriting tried to sound young again. The envelope was cream-colored, folded carefully as if the act itself might erase guilt. The ink wavered slightly at the edges, hesitation dressed as neatness. I ran my thumb along the paper grain. It felt rough, unfinished, like the kind of truth that resists polish. The postmark showed yesterday. She hadn't waited long after the headlines. I sat by the window where the light always lingered too long. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the old clock, slow and uneven, a rhythm that had learned endurance. My hands hesitated before opening the flap, as though the glue might hold back a final betrayal. Inside was a single sheet. No date, no greeting, just her words. I didn't know he'd use my name. That was the first line. Plain. Meant to sound innocent. My eyes followed the ink. Her familiar curls softened, but still deliberate. She explained how she'd signed some papers, believing they were routine, how she'd trusted him the way daughters are raised to. Then she wrote that she had been afraid, that lies had grown like vines around her silence. I read the paragraph twice. It wasn't the confession I wanted, but it was the only one I'd get. Half belief is still belief, half forgiveness, still mercy. I folded the page back, touching the edge where her pen had pressed too hard. The indentations marked the pressure of emotion she couldn't control. Texture doesn't lie. The truth lived in the tremor of each stroke, not the words themselves. Outside, the mail truck rattled away down the street, carrying other stories sealed in other envelopes. I thought of how many families were writing their own unfinished apologies that morning. A faint sound from the hallway made me glance up. The wind had nudged the front door slightly open, letting a thin line of light crawl across the floor. I stood, still holding the letter, and closed it gently. Some things, once read, don't deserve to drift into daylight again. I placed the envelope on the desk beside another one, the first she'd ever written to me, years ago, when she'd asked for help with tuition, promising to repay it soon. The irony of keeping them side by side wasn't lost on me. Began a debt of love, the other an audit of conscience. The grain of the paper under my fingers was uneven, tiny ridges like scars. I caught myself smoothing them, then stopped. Forgiveness, I realized, is not the same as amnesia. It isn't about smoothing the surface until it looks untouched. It's about keeping the wrinkles visible, proof that something once hurt enough to matter. I took a deep breath. The air was dry, heavy with the scent of paper and time. The quiet almost felt earned. For months, every sound had been a summons. Phones, doors, lawyers, the rustle of documents. But this silence felt like a verdict that needed no words. Her letter ended abruptly. No signature flourish, no plea for understanding. Just one final line, the ink darker where she had pressed harder. "Can I come home?" I read it aloud once, softly. The words felt too large for the room. I looked toward the closed door, imagining her on the other side, waiting, the same way I had waited for truth to knock instead of break in. "Home," I whispered back, though I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. Maybe it wasn't a place. Maybe it was a record, filed and kept, just like this letter, archived but not erased. I slipped the page back into its envelope, sealing it again with a quiet press of my palm. Then I placed it in the drawer beside the old one, aligning their corners perfectly. Some memories, I thought, are not meant to be forgiven or forgotten. They are meant to be filed, so that someday someone finds them and finally understands what love looked like after truth arrived. His room smelled of nothing now, not absence, not memory, just air, the kind that settles after too much has been said and too little repaired. The window stood open, curtains unmoving. For months, that room had held anger like humidity. Now it was sterile, hollow, almost bureaucratic in its stillness. The bed frame leaned against the wall, mattress gone. A single chair remained, its wooden arms scratched where he'd carved his initials, letters that no longer belonged here. I ran my fingers along the grooves, tracing each one as though justice could be felt in texture. The scent of emptiness lingered, faintly metallic, like dust and quiet pride. The eviction notice sat on the dresser, stamped and signed. Court order executed. It read like a eulogy that had passed through a clerk's typewriter. Formal, correct, final. I folded it once, then again, before placing it into the folder marked Property, Subdivision 3C. Alphabetical, like everything else now. The key to his door still hung from the hook in the hallway. I took it down, its cool metal pressing against my palm. "Peace," I whispered. "By procedure." For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to justify anything, to neighbors, to friends, not even to myself. Justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't sing. It hums quietly under the skin, a low note of completion. I turned on the small lamp by the door. The light fell in a narrow cone, dust particles turning slow in the beam. The air smelled different now, cleaner, like the house had exhaled. The protector had helped finalize the paperwork that morning. "He signed voluntarily," she'd said, sliding the documents across my table. "No further contest." I nodded, not trusting relief enough to smile. As she left, she looked back once. "You did what needed doing," she said softly. Needed. That word carried its own kind of ache. I sat down in the empty chair, the one he'd once dragged from the kitchen, swearing he'd fix its wobble. He never did. It leaned slightly to the left, loyal in its imperfection. I rested my hands on its arms, feeling the uneven grain under my fingers. Silence pressed in, not heavy, not mournful, just honest, the kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness or explanation. "Did you think I'd never act?" I murmured to the empty room. "That love meant letting you ruin everything unchallenged?" My voice barely rose, yet it filled the space. The clock in the hallway clicked forward once. One sound, one small proof that time still worked, even when families didn't. I stood, gathering the final objects that remained. A pair of cufflinks, a cracked photo frame, a book with his name scrawled in pencil on the inside cover. I placed them in a cardboard box labeled Personal Effects. It felt ceremonial, the way grief sometimes does when dressed as order. When I walked back to the living room, the sunlight had begun to fade. The scent of nothingness followed me, soft and familiar now. I placed the key inside a drawer beside my ledger and shut it quietly. The sound was gentle, almost kind. For a moment I just stood there, hand still on the wood, feeling the echo of that small final act. Justice hadn't come roaring. It had arrived on paper, with stamps, signatures, and deadlines. But peace? Peace had come slower, like a letter that took its time finding the right address. I looked toward the hallway one last time. The light from his room spilled faintly into the corridor, golden and dimming. The walls didn't remember the shouting. They only remembered the silence that followed. When I turned the key in the front door, it clicked softly. No resistance, no echo, no weight. The key turned softer this time. Reflection needs still water. The lake was quiet that afternoon, the kind of stillness that felt deliberate, earned. Sunlight shimmered on the surface like a ledger balancing itself, each ripple an entry, each glimmer a correction. The bench faced the open water, weathered smooth by years of waiting. I sat, papers in hand, the folder marked Session Note, Community Counselor, Reference B42. Even healing had to be documented now. She joined me moments later, the counselor. Her voice was soft, patient, a sound that never hurried. "You've come a long way," she said, as though distance could be measured in pages instead of pain. I nodded. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and the faint trace of light on water, a clean kind of silence. "I didn't come for closure," I told her. "I came to understand what came after." She smiled slightly. "After justice?" "After everything," I said. She leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You kept every document, every receipt. Do you know why?" I looked at the folder resting beside me. "Because memory lies. Paper doesn't." She was quiet for a while. Then, "But memory heals. Paper only preserves." Her words settled between us like sunlight flickering through branches. Unsteady, but warm. A boy rode past on a bicycle, the wheels slicing through gravel with rhythmic certainty. I counted the turns, steadying myself on the sound. 2 exact numbers, 6 rotations, before he vanished beyond the bridge, 3 heartbeats before the ripples from his path reached the shore. I found myself saying, "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about not needing to remember anymore." She nodded. "And do you think you've reached that point?" The water caught a sudden glint of brightness, blinding and brief. "Almost," I said. "The house is quiet, the files are closed, but sometimes at night I still hear the clock ticking past what used to be our arguments." "That's normal," she replied. "Justice doesn't mute the echoes. It only teaches you when to stop answering them." I smiled faintly. The light shifted again, soft across her face. A bird skimmed across the lake, its wings touching the surface only once before lifting away, like a hand signing off the last page. We talked about love, duty, and the fine line between the two. She said, "You carried love like evidence. You turned affection into proof. That's not a crime. It's survival." Her words landed with weight. I wanted to argue, but the truth in them dissolved the need. Across the lake, I could see the reflection of the old courthouse dome, the same one where the gavel had struck weeks ago. It looked smaller now, manageable, like a memory safely filed under. Resolved. She handed me a small note card at the end of our conversation. "For your records," she said, almost playfully. On it was written one line, "When does love become duty?" I turned it over, smiling. "You think that's the question I'm supposed to answer?" She stood, brushing dust from her coat. "No," she said. "I think it's the one you've already lived." When she left, the bench felt heavier beside me. Emptiness carries its own presence. The folder sat open, papers shifting slightly in the breeze. I closed it gently, letting the light trace across its surface one last time before slipping it into my bag. I stayed there a while longer, watching the water hold the reflection of the sun. Ripples caught every movement, storing each shimmer for just a moment before letting it fade. Even water holds records of what passes. Warmth returned, slower but truer. 1 year had passed since the papers were filed, since the last door clicked shut behind consequence. The house had learned a new language of quiet, one that didn't ache. Evening fell in amber strokes across the living room, painting the edges of the old picture frame that still stood on the mantel. The candle beside it had long burned out, its wax hardened into a pale reminder of everything that once consumed too fast. I took a new one from the drawer, its scent faintly of vanilla, untouched. When I struck the match, the sound was soft, nearly reverent. The flame hesitated, then steadied, flickering once before finding rhythm. Its light touched the glass over Emily's childhood photo. She was 7 then, hair tied crookedly, smile missing one tooth. I remembered the day we'd taken it, how she'd insisted on holding the candle during dinner afterward, afraid it might melt without her watching. I hadn't known then how much watching would come to mean. The warmth spread slowly, crawling up my fingers, tracing lines of memory and mercy. The air smelled faintly of wax and dust. Domestic, ordinary, perfect in its smallness. I whispered to the flame, not vengeance, but vigilance. That had been the vow I reversed, the echo of what once began this long reckoning. A promise not to burn everything to ash, but to guard what light remained. On the table lay a small journal, leather soft from handling. Its spine cracked faintly when I opened it. Inside, the handwriting had grown steadier, entries marked with dates and reflections instead of records and receipts. The last page bore a single line from a month ago. Justice is quiet when it's real. I added a new entry beneath it. Healing isn't forgetting, it's filing pain where it belongs. Then I underlined the date, April 12th, and closed the book. The witness, my old neighbor, had dropped by earlier that afternoon. She brought lilies from her garden and said, "The place smells like peace now." I smiled. It did. Even the hallway carried that soft, unhurried scent of renewal. On the far wall hung a calendar, marked with one small note in ink. Anniversary entry, filed. It was procedural, but it mattered. Paperwork had once been my battlefield. Now it was just proof that life continued, correctly documented, properly witnessed. I moved to the window, the candlelight reflecting faintly in the glass. Outside, dusk deepened, and the first stars blinked uncertainly through the haze. Somewhere down the street, laughter spilled from a porch, a reminder that the world had kept moving. I didn't envy it. I'd caught up in my own way. The frame caught the glow again, Emily's photo beside a second one, taken recently, at the lakeside bench. Her letter had become her bridge. Back, tentative but honest. We'd spoken twice since then, cautiously. No apologies rehearsed, no debts tallied. Just words, plain and human. I thought of what the counselor had said that day by the water. Even endings deserve light. At the time, I'd nodded out of politeness. Tonight, I understood. The candle crackled softly, a small sound, but it filled the room like reassurance. The shadows it cast no longer distorted. They defined. I reached out and straightened the photo frame, aligning it so that the flame's reflection sat perfectly at its center. For a moment, I simply stood there, watching wax form a shallow pool around the wick, an ordinary process, beautiful in its purpose. Renewal didn't announce itself. It unfolded in silence, in rooms once haunted by argument and grief. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. The warmth on my face felt earned. The ledger was balanced, the files closed, the house still. The flame steadied, and so did I.